Welcome to Table for One. I'm the narrator. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about Voidfall. This is a strategy video for beginners, so I'm just giving you the basics on how to play this game successfully. Let's get rolling. Alright, so let's talk about some very basic, high-level beginner strategies for Voidfall, just to help you out with your first few games as you're figuring all this out. So I'm going to jump right into it. There's chapter markers in the description, don't forget, as well as other good information down there. But the first thing that I would recommend is get agenda cards into play and get them into play quickly. So agenda cards, as a reminder, is this section here. I've got a whole video about those. You can find a link in the description for that too. But basically, when you slot your agenda cards in the bottom of your player mat here, that's your primary means of gaining influence, which is stand-in for victory points in this game. And so your agenda cards score at the end of each cycle, and there's always 3 cycles in the game. So you've only got 3 opportunities to score those agendas. If you don't get your agendas into play until cycle 3, you've missed 2/3 of your scoring opportunity. Now, I should also say that the scoring tends to be closer to an exponential curve than linear. So at the end of cycle 1, your score is going to go up a little bit. At the end of cycle 3, your score is going to go up a lot, right? So the same agenda card will score more typically in cycle 2 than in cycle 1, and then even more than that in cycle 3. But still, it's really important to build up that base, and it helps you to define your strategy. Well, if these are the things that I'm going to score for, then I'm going to try and do more of those things. And you don't need to necessarily, and I wouldn't recommend really scripting your play like this too much, but as you're thinking about this, just as an example, I've got House Belatan set up here. Just as an example, it's one of the 4 basic houses, and it's not uncommon to have 5 turns in cycle 1. So we'll just pretend we've got a galactic event out with 5 turns right now. So for example, you could play Temptation on your first turn, and then the 2 actions that it allows you to do, you can advance 1 track. So let's advance this one. We gain the bonus. We're going to ignore that for now. And the second thing you can do is you can take any action on one of your preferred focuses, which are these focuses here. So if we look at our prosperity focus, which is one of our preferred ones, we can take an agenda. So let's say we take an agenda, and we'll just, for example purposes, we'll say we take one of these. We take a might agenda, so that goes into our hand. On the next turn, we can play our prosperity card and pair it with that focus we just got. And we can take this action now off of this card to gain an agenda. So let's say that we gain a support agenda on this card on the 3rd turn. Player Conquest focus, and of course this gets slotted now. Player Conquest focus, and pair it with that support agenda you just got. And one of the actions it allows you to take is to gain an agenda. So maybe we don't like this one very much. We looked at the top 2. We didn't like that one. We didn't really like either of the top 2. So we're going to dig through that deck a little. So we're going to take another support agenda. And let's say we like this one much more. So that goes into our hand. At the end of the turn, we can still slot this one. So we've played Temptation, and then Prosperity, and then Conquest. On our 4th turn, we can play Reinforcement and pair it with that support agenda. And one of our actions on this turn, we're going to advance any track, and it's going to be this one. And just for fun, we'll say we take that tech bonus, and Central Surveillance is in play. So we'll just slot that right there. So we've got Central Surveillance, and now we like this agenda better, so we're going to slot it over that previous support agenda, which now just goes on the bottom of this stack here. And for our 5th and final turn, we can play Politics Focus, which then allows us to do 2 things. One, if we have Central Surveillance, we can decrease the population and gain another agenda. So we don't have a wealth agenda yet, so maybe we want one of those. We take it into our hand for next cycle. And the second action the next action we want to take is to advance the Statecraft track, and the bonus for that is to gain another agenda. And we have not used a dominance agenda type yet, so we're going to grab one of those. And so now as we go into the evaluation phase of cycle 1, we have 3 agendas here that we can score instead of just the starting 1. And going into cycle 2, we have 2 more agendas in our hand, and that gives us 4 of our 9 focus cards that we can pair them with to get more agendas that we can slot into this last slot, and then we get all these extra actions on top of it, which is nice. So that's just with a basic house, with a pretty typical 5-turn galactic event for cycle 1. Just as an example, it's possible to get a bunch of stuff out into play, and you shouldn't undervalue that. All right, so the second tip I have is don't undervalue the extra actions that you get from agenda cards. So let's look at Innovation Focus for just a second here. If you've only got 2 actions you can take this turn, sometimes it feels kind of like a waste. Where like, I'm going to spend 3 resources just to gain an agenda card. Like, it feels like I haven't done anything. But don't discount it. It's not a waste of an action. So let's say I use that action to take a wealth agenda, right? So I've got one of these now. On a future turn, I can take this action for free, which kind of makes up for the action here of taking the agenda card. I haven't really lost an action as long as I do play this at some point. But this one in particular, I play all the time just for that action. So I might already have, say, a wealth agenda that I really like and it's slotted. I might get another one. I don't even like the scoring criteria very much for what I'm doing, but I'm going to play it just to place a guild and then produce resources of that type. That can really keep my engine going so that I don't have to spend an action producing resources. I can spend my actions doing something else that works towards my goals a little bit better. And then at the end of the turn, I don't have to slot it. I can just put it on the bottom of the stack. Now, that being said, maybe I've got one and I slotted it because I had it, but I don't particularly like it. It doesn't hurt to keep going through this deck and grabbing another one, get the action, and then replace the one that you don't like. So cycling through the decks is not so bad, because that can lead to greater influence at the end of the game, and also it's giving you more free actions along the way. All right, the third thing that I want to talk about is advancing these civilization tracks. For a beginner, it might be helpful to focus on just one track, but you can definitely get one track up to tier 3 or tier 4 every game. That's not a lofty goal or anything. As you begin to play more, you'll be able to advance 2 of these tracks into sort of that range. And some people can do better depending on what techs are available and what's going on in the game. But I think it's helpful to think of these actions as bonuses rather than trying to, for example, once you advance a statecraft to here, don't hold off on advancing until there's a certain tech available that you've got your eye on. Like, there's other ways to get techs. Don't get too caught up on what the action is. Just advance the tracks as often as you can and take these actions as you get them, because they're all helpful and they're all free. And I'm yet to play a game of Voidfall where I thought I had too many actions or I got to do too many things. So don't be too caught up about trying to maximize the utility of each of these things as you advance the tracks. Just advance them every chance that you get, and it's going to improve your game. All right, the next tip that I have is not to undervalue the immediate tech bonuses. So what I mean by that is when you get a technology card, like, definitely take into account all the stuff that the tech does, right? That's important. But you also usually get something here at the bottom. Sometimes you'll get some influence, and then there's always going to be some sort of other thing that you get. So this is autonomous drones, and this one would let you gain a trade token and deploy a fleet power. Don't discount these actions at the bottom. Sometimes I've taken technologies specifically for that, just to get whatever that action is, because that's what I need right now, and that's what's going to keep my engine moving. And I'll also say that there are no bad techs in this game, so just grab the tech, and if one of these has the action that you need now and you don't have another way to do it, just grab it for that. And whatever the bonus on the tech is, I'm sure it'll be helpful at some point during the game, but don't get too caught up in just focusing on the top part because it's ongoing. That bottom piece is huge too. So in that example, gain a trade token and deploy a fleet power. That's kind of like getting an extra focus card because you've taken 2 more actions. So that's a really big deal. So don't be hesitant to take a tech just for that bottom piece. Now, my next tip is specifically for solo and co-op, which are really the same thing. But don't let the catastrophe or the crisis board derail you. So let's say you've got a crisis card here, and it's a military crisis, and it wants you to spend a trade token. And when you do, you also choose to add Voidborn fleet power to every rift. So you're really planning on using that trade token on your next focus card. You didn't really want to use it now, but you you don't want to add this to here because that's going to cause you some problems. So a couple things to keep in mind. One, look at the penalty. Like this one is at the end of the turn, you can skirmish, and if you win the skirmish, gain a bounty token. So first, just look at the map and determine, would you win a skirmish? And if you would, like, don't bother trying to do that top part. Just take the penalty and you'll win, and then you'll get a bounty token on top of it. So that's great. Maybe it's not so favorable and something else would happen. So I would suggest don't be afraid to occasionally take one of these catastrophe tokens. That's what they're there for. So again, if you can have up to 3 of them, but when they're all in play, if you go to take another one, then you immediately lose the game. So you have to be careful about how you balance that. But I'm also yet to lose a game that way, I should say. So the real problem with these is the Voidborn score 20 victory points, which is just as much as having an incomplete safe haven. So it does feel like a lot. But when you gain a catastrophe token, you either also gain 5 resources of any type, and you can mix and match, or you can get rid of a corruption. So really the point is that it's supposed to, you're going to have to pay for it later, but it gives you a little bit of boost right now, and that might be the boost you need to make it in the end game effectively, rather than trying to contort your strategy around whatever crisis card happens to be up right now. Now, along those same lines, I'll also say don't be afraid to, if you have to, abandon a sector. Typically, something you want to avoid because you're going to lose glory. Voidborn are going to come in and take the sector in most cases if they can. You might lose installations or guilds or whatever bonuses you had from that sector. So it's not something you want to be doing all the time. And even if you have to add a bounty token when you abandon a sector, if you go back into that sector and grab it later, like the bounty token's not going to make up for that cost. That's I'll stop you right there. That's not a viable strategy. But sometimes you just need that fleet power somewhere else, and maybe that sector's not doing much for you, and it doesn't help to be spread too thin. So sometimes strategically, it might make sense to just let a sector go to get your forces doing something else. If it didn't make sense, sometimes it wouldn't be covered in the rules. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes it might make sense to take a catastrophe token or abandon a sector. Now, another thing I want to point out is this game has no production phase like a lot of other games do. So if you compare it to some other things that I like to play, like Terraforming Mars always has a production phase at the end of every generation, or Spirit Island, you gain energy towards the beginning of each spirit phase. This game doesn't have anything like that. So you're not going to gain regular income unless you spend an action to get some income. So until I wrapped my head around that about halfway through my first tutorial playthrough, I was really struggling. I was broke. So don't go broke. That's the strategy tip that I have. But more than that, you want to look for ways to generate resources without having to produce. So you can produce, right here we've got science and credits by playing an innovation card. You're probably familiar with the production card. You can produce food, energy, and materials. That's super helpful. But if you can get those things in other ways without those, then that frees up these other actions for you to take so you can do more things. So how else can you get resources? Well, a couple of them we've already covered. One of them is advancing on your tracks. So if you look at this particular one on your civilization or on your society track, the very first space when you advance is gain a credit and a science. So you want to look for places on your tracks where you can get income. That's always going to be helpful. Do that as much as you can. As you gain trade tokens, and again, I've got a whole video on that, you can gain resources here and here, as well as the spaces above if you choose to take those. And oftentimes, even if you just grab the bounty token will give you some resources. There's going to be bounty tokens on the map if you can invade any of those sectors. If that's part of your plan, doing whatever you're doing, you'll get some resources that way. Of course, I've already talked about the tech cards. So just in this example here, when you gain trade nexus, you also gain 2 food. So that can be very useful. I've already talked about taking catastrophe token and gaining 5 resources that way. That's not something you want to rely on for your main source of income, but it can definitely be helpful if you need it. Same thing for closing a rift. When you close a rift, you can gain resources. Completing a safe haven is another way to gain resources, again, if you're playing co-op or solo. And then I just can't emphasize enough this action here on the wealth agenda. Whenever you can play one of those, if you can put down a banker's guild and then produce credits, that's super useful just because they're so versatile. But whatever particular resource you're using a lot of in that game, you might be using a lot of science if you're going a tech-heavy route. You might be using a lot of energy if you're invading a lot. You might be using a lot of materials if it's a more economic route. Whatever it is, if you can put down form one of those guilds in a sector that has a lot of population and then produce it, that's going to be super helpful. So look for other opportunities besides these two production actions to gain resources where you can. And the last thing, the last tip that I have for you is try and cycle your trade tokens as much as possible. So whenever you can, you want to be gaining trade tokens and then using trade tokens to take extra actions in a strategic way. Again, there's never been a time where I thought I've had too many actions on my turn. I was able to do too many things. Like you want to keep that going, and oftentimes you can get in a cycle where taking an extra third action can get you another trade token back. And so that's going to get you in this loop where you're gaining resources or other benefits from gaining those trade tokens, and then also gaining extra actions on your card. So you want to try and pair those together as much as you can. So look for, just like I said, to look for resources, other places, look for trade tokens, other ways to get trade tokens as well. So you can do that through your agenda cards. You can do that through certain texts. You can do that on your civilization tracks. The more you can keep those trade tokens cycling in and out, the better off you're going to be. You're just going to have a lot more actions, and that gives you a lot more opportunity to do things in the game, and everything you do is going to help you work towards your victory conditions at the end. So I'm trying to keep it short. This is a short video for me anyway, but if you're still here, thank you for watching. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe, leave a like, share it, and definitely leave some comments. Let me know what you think. What other advice do you have for other people who are new to this game? Or was there anything that I said that you found confusing or not helpful? Let me know, and I would love to address it. Otherwise, that's what I've got in this video. Thank you so much for watching Table for One, and I will see you next time.